The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spent a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong. I'm here with Mr. Dane DuPont with HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Kīlauea and Mauna Loa volcano update today on April 2nd, 2021. This is the 103rd day of the Kīlauea eruption. Mauna Loa is not erupting, no signs of imminent eruption. We are going to cover the earthquakes lessening on Mauna Loa after their Tuesday peak. They're still ongoing a little bit. We'll review some of the historical stuff of Mauna Loa as well, since everyone has Mauna Loa on the mind. But we're going to focus a lot on Kilauea, and starting off from Kilauea with the west vent, still a little sluggish but continuous. That's what you guys are seeing here is this sped up time-lapse animation. This is at about 100 times speed here of the sluggish west vent entry. Talk about that here a little bit more briefly. We're also going to talk about the lava lake deepening and the SO2 coming slightly back up, and this whole discussion of lava oozing up around the crater edges that was a subject of the Volcano Watch this week by the USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, whose video this is and whose information we're presenting for the most part, along with some of our own time lapses that we're producing from their still images too. So we got quite a lot to share with you guys today. I'm excited to share all the various aspects. We'll try to break it up into 3 sections here and take some questions in between. Dane will be manning the chats, checking our streams, collecting the questions, and doing what he can on a tech side there. And I will narrate our update today. So what you're seeing here is this west vent entry. The original west vent entry was more over here, but it's shifted a little bit more to the north and east as a result of that overflow out of the northeast vent section of that west vent that flowed down and made a little perch pond up here and then drained away. And it seems like really this is the major change, is that this thing seems mostly taken over. You can see that over here on this left side where the original entry is, you hardly see any action. It could well be flowing under there, but it seems like there could be some joining or it somehow got easier. Most of the flow seems to be coming out a little bit farther northeast now. That's the most major change, and it's a subtle one at that, so not a whole lot there. But there's a lot of detail here. You really can see how the lava flow is so slow that it's creating this section of crust right along the margin of entry, right? And then once in a while it's breaking that crust and carrying it along. Not only that, you can see that the actual lava coming out is cracking and making fractures as it's crusting over here in this area as well. So really slow. It's the crust is forming to the point where it's breaking only a few meters, maybe 20 meters away from the vent, 10 to 20 meters away. So it's going pretty slow. This is sped up 100 times. And let me show you guys the original here. Put that one away. This is the original that was released in the last few days here. Video taken on March 30th. And this is 20 times speed. And they do note here the motion on the lava stream is sluggish. Okay, so I'll play it for you guys here. And this is now 20 times speed, so a little bit slower than the one we just saw. You get a little bit more of the sense of the sluggishness. You can see some of that plastic deformation going on in here. And occasionally you'll see these crusted cracks break apart and flow back in here. Now that's the activity at that west vent right now. Similar to this, they're saying it's so slow it's almost imperceptible to the naked eye. And so to that end, what I've done here is, thank you USGS, let's show you that same video from USGS. This is slowed down to real time now. So it's barely moving, but that gives you an idea, a sense of how fast the lava is actually coming out. And it's not quite as fluid as it would be for the raw video here. But you can see a little bit of the incremental movement of these crusts and this toe over here on the side. You can see them moving incrementally a little bit, but that's about how fast it actually is. So pretty slow. I'll zoom it in here so you guys can maybe get a little better view and of about how slow this stuff is actually coming out. So very, very slow there. And just to recap here, this is the progression of the west vent. And play through it for you guys here. How it was back in December, changed into January. And a lot more volume coming out. We sped it up a few times here at 2 times speed, bubbling over the dome fountain. Here it is, crusting over, but still oozing out early January and really flowing mid-January or so. And then we have the pulsing cyclic effusion. This is really sped up here, but it gives you an idea of the last time we had some really sluggish flow there. And then a little more recently, a couple months ago now, some of the pulsing, a little bit more upwelling, dome upwelling in the beginning of February. And here we are in March, where we have that whole shift to the northeast and a lot less action over here and a lot more sluggish at the same time. Let's put it in a little context there. That's the whole sequence of that west vent entry as we have it documented. We'll turn to the chronology now from the USGS HVO. This is on their multimedia page. Yeah, USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. And they're also noting from Tuesday, 100 days of lava in Halemaʻumaʻu. So you can see here, we have a couple image sequence focusing in on that same area of that west vent entry. You can see mostly dominant over here on this northeast side. And if I scroll down to the next sequence, next image in the sequence, you'll see there is still flow underneath that crust to the point where it'll crack it up and overturn it and raft it away. So a couple of different views of that there. We also have this fantastic view. I really like this one. It shows the active lava surface. There's this more silvery flat color right in there. It's kind of coming around to here. And you really can see all this terracing, all this layered terracing that we've been watching evolve. A really good angle and good light to see all the different terraces that have built up in here. Right. On the south side, and there are some here on the north side as well. Not a whole lot of action on the back side of this crust on the eastern side, but there is still lava oozing up along this crater edge, and that's what we talk about a little bit later in our later segment here. Just to keep things moving here, there's a upper view of that west vent entry area. So you can see the upper areas here with a gas emitting and some glowing holes where, and by USGS reports, there is spatter coming out from here as well. We'll read more about that here shortly, but that's what's going on there. I'm going to zoom it back out here. One day before that, just a slightly different view from the south now, looking at the west vent from the front, and you really see how that little peninsula we were describing during our last couple updates has really solidified itself around that tilted Love Island right in here. It was the original Love Island in Valentine's Day. And still perched above the surrounding terraces, and still drifting some small islets, just these in here. And we haven't seen much action at all on this northeast flank, which is where this original breakout that came around to feed the main entry point now actually began. Okay, so I believe, let me see, did I finish off all of the 29th? Yes, I did. So moving on to April 1st update, which is March 31st photograph here. So a close-up view. I'm going to zoom in from a slightly different angle. And of course, the most striking thing photographically is the inclusion of this bush down here. And you actually can see there's a lot of distance between here and lava. Right? You can see that there's a lot of Kilauea is a place known for vegetation evolving and finding its place in the volcanic landscape, and can't really tell what this is. This may actually even be an alien plant, but in any case, that's interesting to see that in the foreground there. And also to see these other blocks here on the left side that look like some of these collapsed blocks, and maybe if I zoom it in enough, you can see it looks like there's some spatter material that came from these vents and landed on these blocks, but it hasn't actually covered them. So I don't usually get this side of the view or that little plant, so it's kind of an interesting, different perspective there. Right? And at the same time, there's crust overturning happening over here in this little bay. That's that southwest bay, and here's our entry point we've been keeping our eye on. Okay, and then going back, there is the video that was released. I just showed you guys all the different speeds here for March 30th. And moving on, one last photograph here from April 2nd. And this is a great photograph and greatly captioned as well. So let me just move past it and read you guys the caption first here. They do say that there's a horseshoe-shaped spatter rampart in the center, partially filled in by a more recent spatter cone. The cone has an incandescent opening that spatter is occasionally erupted from. And it was doing that about every 10 minutes between a couple hours out of this backside cone as well. So there's a little bit of a glowing spot right there, and then there's one right in here. Let's zoom in on that for you guys. And so not as easy to see the glowing spot there. You definitely can see it here. And you can see this older horseshoe-shaped cone that this new one is inside of it, right in there. There's a little hole. Right, and you can see maybe that those blocks with spatter were somewhere on this back side over here on this back wall that we just saw in the last photograph. We're looking down from that angle. That's where we saw that glowing hole from the top over there, but we couldn't see this one. We're covering all the angles to show us all the information here. And you can also see over here in this bottom part, there's quite a lot of rubble still. This is that big rubble pile, collapse of this other part of the horseshoe that's missing over here in the front. So great photo documentation by the USGS here there. We'll move on to the time lapses. Here's the most recent still image of the thermal camera, the F1 cam. There it is. As you can see, very similar to what we saw a few days ago earlier in the week. This bay over here in the southwest is still overturning, but it is doing so, and it looks like it's shallower there, like there's not as much circulation and convection in that one little spot. That's still ongoing. And to show you guys that in the last 24 hours time-lapse animation from the USGS, here it is. See a little overflow, a couple little overflows here on the edge, on this bottom edge. Let me in more, yeah. There's overflows right in there. Another one right in here. But the entry point's pretty steady right over here, right? And it may be hard to remember that the original entry point was more over here, and actually began kind of here, and it's been migrating its way that way. And then this one now seems to have been taken over by the one slightly northeast right over here. So to look at this in a little more detail, we'll show you guys a little time-lapse zoom in we produced here. So this is just the last 2 weeks or so, and what you can look at is this entry point focused over here. The northern one is already going by this point 2 weeks ago, so you can see the switch over. And I'll zoom into it here. You guys can get the best possible view here. So second point here and here. And you can see somewhere about the middle of the video, somewhere right in here. We really don't see it coming out of this side quite as much anymore. Well, I saw a little bit over there here, but very rarely do you see that. You also see this kind of pulsing effect, right? It's building a crust out, and then collapsing it, and cracking it, and rafting it away, and building it out. And that's what this line over here wiggling is, and this one over here wiggling. It's that crust building up and moving away. So fantastic to see that in the animation. There's that action over there, and hopefully you guys could see that. And maybe just to make sure, I'll zoom it back out here and try to drag the slider right to a point in time where it's more obvious. We have a entry here. Not quite so responsive here. All right, so there's one right there. See it right there. And now I'll zoom to the end. You can see that that's really not as visible anymore right over here. So not to say it's disappeared entirely. That's really hard to tell from the imagery we have here, but it does seem like it's much reduced and the northern one is dominant. So I haven't shown you guys the whole sequence in a while. I'll show it to you guys here from start to finish. From the original water lake getting vaporized, the island moving around. Here comes the crusting over of the back half of the lava lake. And at the same time, that's when we start seeing lava coming out of the cracks, oozing up along that crater wall. And that's what we're talking about, is this action that's happening along that margin back in here. To start back in here, and that seems to be related to the fact that that's where the big crust is. And then as we have more crusting over coming around the island and this active lava surface shrinking, we do see more of the ooze-ups coming up along the other margins over here as well. So there it is.
We have a $50 super chat from Stefan Herkowitz. He says, "Thanks for all your hard work. Happy Easter." Mahalo,
Stefan.
Thank you.
Mahalo. Yeah, I'll play it for you guys one more time. That's the whole time-lapse sequence there. I'll play it for you guys one more time without drawing on it here. You can see all the various phases. It's interesting to think about now how much that active lava surface has shrunk, and so that's a really interesting thing to watch here. And certain processes are really brought out by this speed time lapse, and other ones you really don't see any of this, the lava going down under the lake margins. We're moving way too fast for that. We're looking at the long-term changes with this kind of speed time lapse, and just one of the uses, and that's why being able to manipulate time in this way with these time lapse images is such a invaluable tool over such a dynamic landscape like this. So that's the whole sequence, and we'll focus on those outer edge ooze-ups here shortly as well too. Okay, so moving now to the S1 camera, in the most recent view, visible view here. There it is. And we'll scroll down to their automatic 24-hour time lapse there. And it's pretty much business as usual, not a whole lot of change. The lava lake is still slightly rising, very slowly rising. And maybe that's aided by the stability and the tilt signal. So we'll look at that. This is only 24 hours loop back and forth. You see some glowing up here in these upper vents. So once again, to try to offer you guys a little bit more, here's an animation of the last 3 days on the S1 camera. You can see maybe a little bit more continuous, some slightly different changes. It looks mostly the same. The last 3 days aren't that different from the last day. But there it is for reviewing pleasure. Okay, so one last one here. This is the bonus for today. We don't always look at this KW camera. This is the original camera that was pointing at the water lake way before this eruption began. And it's a harder camera to work with because you gotta zoom in more and bigger effect from the day and night. Here's the last 24 hours time lapse, which if I zoom in, pretty good here. You can really see all this terracing from this angle. Really showing up there. But once again, I wanted to show you guys something a little different. And so one of our viewers requested this, and I'll put for you guys from the very beginning the whole sequence of the filling of the lava lake and the closing it in here. Pretty quick from that KW camera. Really closing in here by the end to this smaller area. I'm going to play it one more time so you can compare that here. I took just the dawn and dusk pictures out of this one. And there it is, our KW camera. I'll try to post these later on too when we get them a little more polished up here for you guys. So turning to the text update, we have here our Friday update, April 2nd. And let me get a better color here. And let me make this readable for at least a few of you guys. Nope, that's not where I was going. Here we were. All right. Our most recent lava lake measurement, 738 feet deep, 225 meters. So that's 1 meter since the last increment. And we've bounced back up to 1,200 tons a day, measured yesterday. And the measurement before that was at around 700. So that was up it was up a little bit from the range before, which was more in the 500, 600 range. So up slightly, small variations. It seems like the long-term pattern is still revealing itself here, with the variations being fairly large still. And that's what that looks like here on the plot. We do have we're measuring here 1,200 at the top, 300 at the bottom, and 100 per hash. So our most recent measurements here that were in the 500 range. 600, 500 range here last week, or now there's a 700, 8, 9, 10, another one is going to be up here somewhere when this actually shows up on the plot. Okay, so likewise, the VOG is variable as well, and it's still blowing around. So here it is, mostly to the southwest, and still some effects on the Kona side, ongoing now for on the 103rd day, and it's a lot better than the first week for sure. But it does get old after a while, yeah, and lingers, and there are chronic issues as well to be concerned with. All right, so moving on, here is our most recent 1-month tilt plot at Wikahuna, and I'm loading up the direct link here where we don't have the POO line, so we can see the full range of this. So we had that small inflation earlier in the week, and we've had a very modest small rise of 1 microradian since then. So really not a whole lot of change. Fairly stable really for this whole period going back most of the last week now. Right? We really only had a variation of a couple, 2.5 microradians for that DI event, and a couple microradians apart from that. And net, only 2 microradians or so. So not a whole lot of change, pretty stable, and maybe that allows that stability of lava lake appearance as well. Going to the USGS, here's zoomed in for the last 2 days. Some small changes, pretty meaningless, 0.2, 0.2. And maybe more interesting is, the slight upward trend that you get here, besides the little bumps that are the zoomed in version there. Of course, this is the deflation inflation earlier in the week here. And the past month with a PO green line that is scaling most of this Wikihuna signal into a very small part of the graph here. Makes it quite a bit less useful. Okay, looking at the GPS on Kilauea, this is interesting here on Kilauea. We see that trend so far seems like that we did have at least a increment of time where it was fairly stable and not extending or contracting. And not to say it won't change as we get more data here to the right. So interesting to see how long-lived this little effect happens to be here, and if that indicates anything, or if it's another variation like this one over here, where it seems stable, down, up, there's a lot of variation within there. So not a whole lot of news on a GPS for Kilauea either. All right, the lava lake depth. I'm showing you guys this graph for the past month. Almost getting to the point now where it's actually got to the point a little while ago. You really can't tell a whole lot from this graph between a 220 and a 230. So we will move to the weekly graph now. There is a weekly graph for the lava lake depth here. Now we're getting 0.2 meter increments between the hash marks here. So we actually can see some of these smaller scale variations that we haven't seen before that have to do with the crust forming and bulging and those local variations, right? So you can tell that the scale of those, the up and down, it can go down, up and down. It looks like in a range of, what's this one right here? Maybe half a meter or so at most, usually 1/4 of a meter up and down variations. And beyond that, there's a longer term trend here, this upward trend of filling, and that's what's really important there. And so based on that, we've come up to right in here, 225 meters just about. That's 738 feet. So that is the last month, and we're almost done with the monitoring data here for Kilauea before we take our first set of questions. And here is our last week of seismic on Kilauea. A little bit of south flank action, not a whole lot. A little bit of summit action, not a whole lot. Typical Pahala activity, nothing really new there. And no obvious patterns on the geographic x-axis here. It's kind of just normal. And this plot is earthquakes per day for the last week. Barely worth looking at that scale. And with time on the x-axis over here, fairly steady at Pahala, fairly steady in the upper parts of the south flank as well. Nothing unusual going on there. All right, and one last thing here to kind of circle back to our tilt plot. Since this is the 1 week plot of tilt, we can compare it to that lava lake plot. And just a note here, our small deflation inflation is coming in between the 28th, the 29th, and more or less by the 30th, it's back to normal, right? So maybe not quite to the 30th. 28th to the 29.5, right? And so if I scroll back up here to the lava lake plot, here's a 28th, 29.5. And you can see that there's a little bump right in here. And this maybe was a little manifestation of that small deflation inflation event. And you can see that it was on the order of half a meter or so as well, based on the scale. Interesting stuff there. That, I believe, wraps it up for the data here on Kilauea. And before we take our questions, I do want to mention that we are brought to you by HawaiiTracker.com. You can go check out the website. Some great photographs like this one by Warren Fince of Kilauea, Moonbow on Kilauea. I thought I'd stick this in our Kilauea section here. Other historical articles. Contributor Marin put in an article about the April 1st tsunami, anniversary yesterday, and other events in there as well, so go and check that out. So with that, Dane, pass it over to you.
Right, I appreciate it. Yes, we are brought to you by HawaiiTracker.com. Best way to support us is to like, subscribe, share this video. Also, become a member on HawaiiTracker.com. That's where we post all of our information, and it helps sort it out a little better than Facebook does. And maybe even consider making a monetary donation to help support us directly. We do have a few people I want to acknowledge today that were new donators, Joy P. And then we had a few monthly donators, which is a reoccurring support for us, and it really helps keep us going, especially when the things are quiet. Lori H, Robin M, Erica S, and Dale D. Appreciate it, you guys.
Mahalo, mahalo.
All right. With that, let's get into some questions. Don't have many, but we do have a few. So Michael T was asking about, do we know if the lava lake is draining? And if so, any ideas on how much is draining? We know it's pretty, you just showed the levels stable, right? But is it draining? Is it filling in and draining at the same time to get that stability?
Yeah, that's a big unknown. We really can't tell with the surface data, right? You need some other information, maybe with some more novel techniques that USGS is using. But yeah, it's that's something that's been unknown. It's been a curiosity because we did see early on there were some vents really far down on the crater floor that could have been some possible outlets, right? But we really don't know. We really don't know. When we had the biggest deflation-inflation sequence, or the actual whole surface of the active lava lake crusted over the entire way before it resurfaced itself a couple of times, when that happened, the lava level was dropping slightly, but it was on the order of a couple meters, 1 to 2 meters or so, to the point where you could account for that with the volume of gas that was trapped underneath that whole massive volume of 30 million cubic meters, right? That's, imagine what percent of gas, oftentimes when it comes out, you might guess it's like 25% gas or something like that, right? So there's a quite a bit of possible built up gas. You might have like a whole foamy lava layer underneath that crust in there that's allowing the other lava lake to still just slide under there without ever lapping over or crunching that thing. There's something weird going on in there as well. But we really don't know until it's all the way over how much it actually drains out, how important the draining actually is, right? It seems like it's minor right now. It could be happening. It could have been happening the entire time and just offset by the input because the input's been enough. And until the input slows down enough, and when input's been slow recently, we have seen drops in the lava lake level as well. But it still won't know for sure until it actually stops erupting all the way and we can see whether it does drain back down or not. Right. So far, we've been treating this as mostly an eruption is coming in from above and the side, rather than coming in or out from below. Right,
so talking about fusion rates, carrying on with that, our moderator Les Pedersen asks, is output actually decreased, or is the fusion just spreading out over a wider vent? We saw in 2018 as the vent continued to exist or prolonged itself, it seemed to increase the mouth to not change the not change the amount of volume coming out, but changing the height of the fissure of the fountains. So
right.
Is there something similar going on here potentially?
Yeah, that's certainly an effect that could be happening, right? I've always liked to call that the nozzle effect, right? You can change the nozzle, change the shape of the nozzle, and you can get a finer spray or a taller spray or a more volume and less height, or less diameter and higher spray. So that's kind of how I think of it. So that certainly could be happening over there. But if I can pull back up this graph we made last week, and this is based off of the USGS maps of the volumes, and when we've hit 30 million gallons, and when we hit 29, and when we hit 28, and so on and so forth. I might have to scroll over to the right here. To the right, so yeah, here we go. And down some more, right? This blue line is the one that is the volume incrementally between those map updates. So we're somewhere in a range of one significant figure of 1 cubic meter per second right now. And that's within a range that it's been, for a little while. It's hard to tell if it's really down from 1.7 to 0.7, if we can have that kind of resolution, or if it's really slightly more than 1 and slightly 1 right there. But we can say that the long-term pattern is of less output. That's what we can say for sure, based on this trend over here. Right? The smaller details, it's hard to tell. There definitely could be an effect at the nozzle there, right? So for sure. How less for the question.
All right. So next question, a little bit more abstract. It's talking about, it's from Lynn DeWitt, asks, will this eventually become a dome, or are domes formed a different way? And then what is any details on that type of formation?
Right. How can I best show you guys this? The word dome, you do hear it here in Hawaii, but usually we're talking about like the doming of a fountain, like the fountain bubbling through the lake where it builds like a standing wave, and that's
right.
what we often refer to in Hawaiian as our lava domes per se, right? If you go somewhere like St. Helens, like that, the dome is the actual lava column that's so viscous it gets squeezed up and out of the cone over time, right? I wonder if I can maybe bonus if I can find it here real quick, if I can show you guys a video of that from the USGS.
Right. One of the good examples of the Hawaiian Dome was the image we showed last week from 1921. It had that big, perfectly symmetrical dome, and it's just a feature that has been seen many a time. I believe Kīlaueaiki also saw one, or Mauna saw one as well. Not sure.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay, so I think I found the video here. Let me see if I can get this switched over. And so this is USGS video. This is a time lapse of Mount St. Helens dome growth, 2004 to 2008. And this is the stickier kind of lava, right? Not the Hawaiian kind of lava, but you get an idea here. And it starts off over here. And so this lava, it's like a toothpaste, right? You can squeeze in the tube, and it just squeezes up and out, and just piles up and piles up and piles up. And if I zoom in more, maybe you can see some of that motion in there. Another peak coming up right in here. A big gob hill of lava, right? And all this rubble shifting underneath it. Oh, now it's oozing more this way. This is a classical. If you ask about a volcanic dome, this is what people are talking about: is this more silicic, this more sticky, more viscous kind of lava that erupts at other volcanoes, not in Hawaii, for the most part. This peak right here coming up, and this is classic from St. Helens example of dome growth right here. So you do hear the word dome in both places, but we mean something totally different than this. We mean, let me find the image here while this finishes playing out here. What we mean when we say lava dome in Hawaii is normally a dome fountain, right? To kind of be more specific. And a dome fountain, I can find it. It is that. That's our dome fountain. This is the one we showed from 1921 March, from the red solfatara, right? I'm a little tongue twisted trying to say that word, but it's the solfatara, the red solfatara. It's 20 feet wide, about 9 feet high right here. This is our Hawaiian dome fountain, and what you saw prior was the Mount St. Helens lava dome.
All right. We'll call this the last question for this round, and I can help answer this one a little bit as well. Vicinity asks, why are people allowed to approach the active splatter cone in Iceland, but seeing the lava lake and Kilauea is banned? Crater rim instability, gases, and an active cone seems more dangerous to me. That is a question we get a lot, especially with the juxtaposition of Iceland versus 2018. There are many a difference between the two. One, theirs is happening in a very remote region that nobody lives in, and they can go and build trails and stuff like that much more easily. Whereas here, it was in a neighborhood and had a bunch more emergency crews responding to it, trying to make sense of the whole thing. They never had to worry about things like thieves and things along those lines. And then inside the national park, it's the national park, and there's a whole bunch of regulations that just go along with it's the national park. On top of that, there's a whole bunch of cultural parts of it as well, just respecting the volcano a little bit more here. would be my interpretation of it. But then there's just the government policy aspect of it all too. Sometimes the government just makes weird decisions and won't back away from them. And it seems like in Iceland, they have a little more grasp on keeping it balanced.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that Iceland is more geologically active than Hawaii. They have, believe it or not, a lot more practice than Hawaii does. If there's anywhere, you know, that's one of the places, right? The lava is in a bowl. It's in a bowl, so that's different than 2018. It's not that different from 2020 and 2021 right now, because our lava's in a bowl here in Hawaii right now, and actually it's a bowl you can't walk into, unlike the Iceland bowl, which you can walk into. So in theory, well, not that someone wouldn't try, or you wouldn't have to worry about the cliff edges or people falling in and that kind of thing, right? But yeah, it may have to do more, I would say, with the bureaucratic process of restoring the summit after the 2018 summit collapse. The fact that all the trails got cracked and the roads got cracked and everything else. If they had repaired those trails by now, they would have no reason to keep them closed, right? Because there would be access that was established already. But because there wasn't access already established because of cracks or other hazards that, you know, what have you, you know, there was a lot of damage across all of national park. I would imagine they've prioritized areas that people have been able to get to more frequently, right? To the point where just recently we saw the Nahuku lava tube reopen, right? One of the most popular places in the national park. So a lot of infrastructure maintenance going on there, and that's what I would imagine it is, right? But that said, it is up to just the management really, and what they prioritize and how they choose to run a ship, so to speak. And that's for better or worse how it is in Hawaii.
All right. Well, that does it for this section, and we will be taking questions now for Mauna Loa for the next section. All right. Back to you, Phil.
All right, so we'll start off looking at the earthquakes here. Earthquakes on the USGS website here. And you guys can see, I guess not quite what I wanted to do. Going this way. I'm getting some funny lines here, but let's roll with it. You get the Pahala earthquakes, Kīlauea earthquakes, not a whole lot there. And Mauna Loa, not so much. You know, this is, we're still looking a few here in the northeast. We still have ongoing in the northwest. Let me zoom in some more. There, I lost my lines. So you can see that the oranges, maybe it's worth bringing up the key here, right? The oranges are the last day, the yellows are the last week, and the reds are the last hour, right? So there are earthquakes still happening, the orange ones in the last day. Not nearly as much as before. You can see that we certainly had that cluster in time and space earlier in the week. That prompted the statement, you know, there are still earthquakes ongoing there, but it's a lot less than before, right? So you would imagine that there's whatever process is happening there, which I've speculated is related to magma moving into some of these dike complexes at the edge of the magma complex over here. That's still ongoing, right? It's something that it's like a balloon filling up. When you first blow into the balloon, you have to overcome that resistance, right? And then once you inflate it a certain amount, add an incremental a little bit more, it can keep stretching the edges, but it's not as big of a pressure change as it was at the beginning there. So they can be still ongoing. There's probably still magma moving within the volcano, and that's okay. We can't freak out every time magma moves inside every volcano in Hawaii, or we're going to be freaking out every week. It's just it's certainly something that we do want to be attentive of, the activity here, and comparing it to other eras. So let's dive into that some more here. If we look at the past month, we do see that there is still ongoing activity at the summit. This is now all magnitudes, right, down to magnitude 0. And here is our little cluster to the northwest, with a couple deep earthquakes, but nothing really that much noteworthy. We look at the rates and depths for the past month, and we're now getting earthquakes per day. This is our unit that we really like to have, earthquakes per day. We hit 120 on the one day after being around a background of somewhere in the 30s for the last month. And prior to that, we were getting up to around 50 or so. maybe, you know, maybe that's not true. Maybe it's 50 something else. So we'll focus on the last month here. So we definitely did spike up here. That was Tuesday, and that was Wednesday, and that was Thursday, and here's today at the very end, not all the way completed. So it may come up a little more still. But certainly there was a peak on Tuesday, and it's back down, and it seems to be trending downwards slightly, right? Okay, so that's the context for the last month. If we go back to the last year and see that our current earthquakes per week now, right? So our current week is up here near 250, which is a peak we saw earlier in the year as well, right? When we had those other earthquake flurries. And so we're seeing more of this activity. The peaks are getting a little bit higher, but it's still not staying consistent at that elevated rate. So the peaks getting higher is a sign of things, you know, maybe moving up slightly, but I would say we're still in third gear. So right, we still have room to shift a couple of levels of activity higher than what we're seeing here, but dramatically higher, right? So I'm going to keep showing this one. This is 1975 eruption buildup, and this one was a slower buildup than 84, as it has been pointed out by some of our viewers. We'll talk about that here as well. So we actually had quite a bit of lead time, right? Over a year of lead time from when we saw those first little spikes, spiking up, and then you can see that at a certain point in time, the background level is over here. The background level actually rises, right? And you actually get spikes into a few spikes of over 1,000 per day. Right? So, and then at some point before the eruption actually begins, that whole background goes, this might be your fourth gear, it goes into fifth gear right here. Right, and then you're really cruising towards an eruption right there, and when it gets to that kind of stage. So we may be hitting here earthquakes per day. We might have hit one of these peaks like this. We may be in this kind of beginning stages. We haven't seen background come up, and we haven't seen the higher peaks that we expect for the fourth gear, which would be the next phase of build up towards an eruption, right? So let's expect to see that next. 1985. These are now hourly counts. But 1985 had a little bit more dramatic increase at the last minute here. There had been months and months of buildup. You can kind of see that for days ahead, you were coming up to, the whole background came up to where you were having 10 earthquakes per hour for most of that week beforehand. Right? Maybe not 10, maybe 5 per hour, but no, you know, somewhere in that range of 5 to 10 per hour continuously for a week before you had that spike and eruption came on. Okay, so to address this, there's a couple of things to say. First is that Mauna Loa eruptions very often occur in sequence of a summit eruption first, and then a summit flank sequence. In this case, the 1975 eruption was a summit event. In 1984 was the summit flank sequence that followed it. Right? It was the longest one. It took 9 years for that to happen between 75 and 84. That's really unusual. Every other one historic record before that was somewhere between 6 months and 2 years between the summit eruption and then a summit flank sequence that comes in the following eruption, right? So one of the reasons that a lot of us may expect the first eruption to be at the summit and then stay at the summit and then end before the next eruption after that being the one that actually starts at the summit and then goes down one of the rift zones, means that the next eruption, when we build up to it, may be more like the first summit phase rather than the flank phase. 84, this is the flank phase, right? Summit flank phase. 75, this is the summit phase, right? In 1975 was an eruption that occurred after 25 years of quiescence, right? So we're currently right now at, what are we at, 37 or so, maybe 37? In 1975, it was 25 years. So that's the longest gap between eruptions, besides the current one, was the one right before now. And before that, it was every few years, you'd have something happening. Right? So the best analog we have is the most recent one as well. The 1975-84 sequence is the best comparison because we saw, and in that case, you know, it had been quiet for 25 years. You might think, well, maybe the magma's building up. You might have a huge eruption when it first comes out. In 75, that's not what happened. It was actually a fairly small, relatively speaking, right? It was a summit-contained eruption. It did go down a little bit the northeast and southwest rifts and upper parts. But then it ended after that summit phase was spent, and it took 9 years to recharge into the rift phase, right? So it could be that if we have, speculating once again, but if we follow the pattern, then after almost 40 years of quiescence, you might have again a small summit eruption and then a long gap before you have some kind of rift eruption that might come into the habitable regions. At least we would hope, right? So that's it's only one data point. It's we've shown a folly in this kind of analysis when trying to analyze the recovery of 1924 explosion to the 2018 collapse. It doesn't always work out with only one data point, but it's mostly what we have to work on, right? So that's the best thing to go on at this point. Mauna Loa does seem to be shifting gears. And something we'll tease for next week, we can go into a little bit more. We've discussed how Mauna Loa and Kilauea don't actually connect their magmas, right? But but they do lean on each other, and there are ways that their pressure can be connected as well. And so we can dive into that whole can of worms a little bit more as we watch Mauna Loa come up and try to imagine what kind of response it might have and why Kilauea and Mauna Loa might be playing opposites, or why they're playing together in different points in time. So, but for now, suffice it to say that I do feel that looking at 1975 buildup is justified, right? We do kind of certainly want to make sure we have this Mauna Loa shorter sequence as a possibility in mind in case it does break the pattern that we've seen, right? But there's one more thing right here, right? I want to point out this is, the USGS does have eruption pages for all of Mauna Loa's eruptions here. So you can see 1984, 1975 over here. 1975, it went just before midnight, July 5th, and ended 7:30 p.m. July 6th, so only a couple day eruption. And 1984 here, there's a lot of it. I'm only going to focus on this in-between part, this 9-year quiescence period. They do say that there was a 3-year period of slowly increasing earthquake activity beneath the volcano that included a swarm of earthquakes between 3 to 9 miles deep, and that was mid-September, right? So if we have a swarm that's this from 3 to 9 miles deep, where you see that vertical rising of magma from deeper to shallower, then you can say, yeah, that's another priming your volcano for eruption a little bit more too. But finally, the earthquakes reached a maximum frequency just after a 6.6 magnitude earthquake took place beneath the southeast flank of Mauna Loa in the Kīlaueaiki fault system. And quite often there is a big earthquake either in Kīlaueaiki or on the Kona side faults that is a warning, or it's an indicator that's been true almost every time, right? There's almost always a big earthquake that precedes this ramp up as well. So that is something we are awaiting to see. We have had earthquakes, but nothing in the size in the range of 5 to 6, which is the next thing. When that happens, then we can be more prepared for the summit to erupt, right?
Speaking of preparation, we have a $5 super chat from Michael T, who asks, does Hawaii have an evacuation plan if a hurricane makes landfall during the eruption?
Well, they have independent plans, and I don't think that there is a section of the plan written that addresses them both concurrently in that combination. No, but they do have plans for both, and I believe the idea is you implement them both concurrently, even if there's not a chapter written on how exactly you do that.
Right. And a lot of the plans, it goes to how to secure resources for the specific disaster, right? This is a hurricane. These are the steps you need to go through in order to get the FEMA funds as soon as possible to start a recovery process, right? In terms of evacuation, you're going to evacuate from one or the other. It's not going to be that the volcano's fine, but the hurricane is coming and the interaction is going to make us evacuate. It's going to be one or the other that you have to evacuate from.
Right.
All right. So appreciate the super chat, Michael.
Mahalo. Yeah, so Mauna Loa is definitely building up. Here is the last 5 years earthquakes, right? You can see that it's been building up. There's that northwest cloud, you can't even see the middle of it. There's this summit cloud, you can't see the middle of it, the upper southwest rift cloud. So it's been building up for a long time, and it's not a matter of if it erupts, but when she erupts, and that's been the case for a long time. So, no illusions there. There's no wool over everyone's eyes, right? The volcano is building towards an eruption, but it's been doing that at a slow rate for a long, long time. And, some of us need to be more convinced by seeing something like a Kīlaueaiki earthquake or a Hilena earthquake on a coincide, and seeing the background levels go up, and seeing higher spikes, and at some point seeing shallowing of earthquakes from deeper to shallower, right? That's all the stuff that we're missing, right? So if we start seeing all those things, then we'll be there as well, talking about spending more time on Mauna Loa than we are now, right? So the reason that we don't spend more time than this is because it's been doing this same stop and go for a long time. So it takes a little bit more convincing. You need to see the big earthquake, you need to see the shallowing, you need to see the background levels go up, and maybe we see something else on a shorter term monitors as well, right? So
Mauna Loa is the master of pump fakes. Every time he looks like it's going to do something, it's like, oh, never mind. We'll see, though. One day it's going to be like, nope, I'm serious.
Yeah, it's going to happen someday. It's just a matter of time, right? If we look at the tilt in a short term, this is what we can look for. There's no huge drop in showing any major magma migration, right? So there is a decline. There is a shifting. It's still ongoing. It's still trending down, like it's getting pushed. The station's getting pushed towards the crater, which is what we expect if we have intrusion to the north of there in an area that earthquakes. And correspondingly, we're still seeing the contraction appears to be steepening here of magma moving into that northern part of the volcano there. And so this is not that magma is leaving the volcano. It's just a matter of where the two stations that are the rulers for this are measuring, right? We're basically, when this signal is going up here, the ruler is completely containing the area the magma is going in. And when a magma goes outside of the ruler's zone that's measuring it, then you get one of these little dips like this. And so it seems like that's happening again there. And just that on its own, I would like to see more information. I'd like to see the INSAR, especially, right, for Mauna Loa here, and see in not just where the GPS stations are located, but across the whole land surface, which areas are deforming and how. I mean, that would be the more interesting information to get, to really get the bigger picture of what's going on and a longer term pattern, right? So INSAR is also a tool you can time bracket it for different lengths of time. So you could do a 3-month window for your INSAR analysis and see what it's been doing recently, or just the last week, what changed in the last week, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully we'll have more information coming from the INSAR experts on that. INSAR is pretty difficult to generate. There's a lot of pitfalls there. And that is our Mauna Loa segment, right? So on a short term, we're seeing these localized changes at the summit, right? But that is the extent there, and it's still magma seems to be moving in there, right? The fact that this line also hasn't stabilized and flattened out, it's still moving down, means that is happening. And so this may be just a domino, and it's not to say that the domino won't hit another domino that eventually leads to an eruption, but this in itself is not a sign of the eruption. Right? And we're still building up slowly. It's a big storage area in Mauna Loa, right? It's a big balloon in there. So you can imagine, to pressurize it, it'll take a while. So, all right, Dane, have anything to add here before we jump into Kilauea?
It is interesting that that GPS plot that we were just looking at there, the distance between the two, because one of the stations we don't have access to, and one of them we do. You were saying it is measuring the distance between two of the stations. It does look like the one station.
Yeah, it may just be the particular web page online. Yeah, I think that data is somewhere.
It is
somewhere. Yeah, I'll have to look again.
Yeah. We'll just see if we can find that one, because one of them, it does look, the one that we do have, or I do have pulled up, it was showing a northward movement, and that wasn't showing up previously, even though the disc cross caldera distance was already showing some change. So that's really interesting there, and it is very leading edge of a signal, it looks like, to me at least. But it could be how big of an edge is it? How long does that edge go until you get over the the point?
Right. Yeah, we may not have it in a resolution that's very useful, right? We might only have like a 10-year plot or 20-year plot or something like that.
That might be what it is.
Might be what it is. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, so what I can show is I can bring up the 2-year GPS plots we have here. So we do have some up at 12,000 feet elevation over here in the south, and you can see that they're just trucking along. It's no sharp changes in any of those signals. Maybe some minor deviations here and there, but nothing that really jumps out as unusual there.
So I'm really showing at that MLSP station. It's only really one where I was looking at it, though a 2-year. But yeah, let's get into some questions. But before we do that, I do want to thank Brenda P for donation on hawaiitracker.com/support. That is how we take donations directly. And we do have a few good questions here. Two Pineapples asks, Mauna Loa has a historical history of erupting every 5 to 6 years on average since 1843. The last eruption was in 1948. What has caused this to stop? Is magma moving away, or what's your interpretation of that? Just blowing past the average for so long.
It's yeah. I mean, no one really knows exactly, right? I mean, it may, and this is what I like to present maybe next week out. Is it may be because of Kilauea's 37-year eruption that is drawing more pressure, if not the magma directly away, right? It can draw the pressure away, and that can reduce the flow into Mauna Loa. So that's something we can dive into a little more. Right. Details of that. It's not easy to explain very quickly. But essentially, it could be getting affected by Kilauea is one answer. Right? There are times when volcanoes seem to, in Jagger's early days, he thought that they always erupted in sync, that they were all connected because they were erupting in sync in some ways. And so there are times that they erupt in sync, and there are times when they are opposite. They actually, if one is erupting, the other one is less likely to erupt. And if you look at this more recent era, that is the case, is that if one is erupting, the other one is less likely to erupt. And so there's some interplay there, and that's what the pressure theory, poor pressure theory really tries to untangle, is how you can have and what those signals really mean at that point in time. Right.
And just to address what he's talking, the 1843 we've talked about before as being one of those transition periods between the one being the dominant volcano and the other one becoming the dominant volcano. And the 5 to 6 year average is done if you snapshot between 1843 and 1955, right? That period of heavy activity on Mauna Loa. That's where that number comes from. Yeah. But outside of that, we don't have a historical record in modern times to be able to reference of, all right, what's the interval like during inactive phases of Mauna Loa? We know what the average is on active phases of 5 to 6 years. What is inactive? It might be 27 years or 37 years. We don't really know. It's just the limitations of the historical record that we have access to in the geological record, which is doesn't go back that far for us to be able to interpret it like that.
Right. I do have a plot that I can throw up for Two Pineapples here. So this is not exactly easiest thing to read here, but this is a plot that's from professional paper 1806, and this describes at the top, this is Mauna Loa at the top, and this is Kilauea at the bottom. And so at the bottom, let me describe the bottom first. This is cumulative magma volume. So in the bottom, it's how much has come out in total, and so what you're looking for is the steepness of the line in here. And so coming out pretty fast, then coming out pretty slow on Kilauea, and then coming out pretty fast again. Right? Now Mauna Loa, this is magma volume per eruption in cubic kilometers. So each bar is one eruption, and that's the volume of that eruption. And the actual line is the fact that there was an eruption. So you can see that in this era before 1840, low frequency of Mauna Loa activity, and then between 1840 and 1950, all those eruptions, And since then, only 75 and 84, that one sequence of summit flank sequence. Only one summit flanks, only one combined sequence. And it was spread out during this time, right? So we don't know what happened in this period back over here. Before 1840, there's not a whole lot of information. But here's what we do know from 1840 on. There does seem to be some, at least in this period of time, right, some correlation. And then within this, there might be times where you might have like little surges together where, oh, this one's a little steeper. And look, there's a little bit higher activity here. Maybe there was some pulse that came into both volcanoes. So you have those layers, and that's what I'm going to try to untangle next week.
You're right. Michael T has a good question from YouTube. Is it possible that Mauna Loa could cause a volcanic tsunami in the next eruption?
If there are landslides, certainly, yeah. I mean, if the ground is tilting and swelling and there's an earthquake, then yeah. I mean, there's some steep slopes on the Kona side. There could be some small landslides. We do know there have been big landslides in the past, and we don't know what that looks like in the record. However, just like almost all of Earth science theory, you'd expect to see that the bigger the event, the more small signals there are ahead of it happening, right? So you start seeing a bunch of earthquakes at the base. Like, for example, a south flank earthquakes would see elevated before the south flank moves. And similarly, you'd see the Kīlauea flank activate before you saw it move in a big chunk as well. So that's something certainly to be aware of, yeah. As the volcano changes shape, right? And yeah, good question. And no way to predict that, but basically that falls in the category of general tsunami preparedness. The earthquake doesn't have to be here for it to be dangerous. It just means you have less time to get your stuff and run uphill. It happens locally, right?
Right. All right, so Bill Cal, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, from YouTube asks about the flanks of Mauna Loa. Do they have fault that act as conduits for flank eruptions, or how do those rift zones really operate, or what's their function on Mauna Loa?
I've always thought of rift zones as a combination of a fault and a magma pathway, both. Right, so I think of it as a fault that magma can move through in a way, right? That's how I think of rift zones. So they are faults, they are weaknesses, but they do have, because the volcano Mauna Loa is so tall and has such a topography there. It does have kind of scallops on both sides as well, right? The thing being at the southeast flank of Mauna Loa is buttressed by Kilauea, that's over here on the side holding it up. So you don't get quite as much. It's as much motion there, and it's a little bit more ambiguous, as we've seen with the Kīlaueaiki fault area, right? But you do have that on the Kona side as well, yeah, especially the south Kona side. If you go northwest, you have Hualalai sitting over there, so that's another buttress over on that side as well, and then to the north is Mauna Kea, is a buttress there too. So really the area that's the most dangerous for the landslides is that southwest corner of the island and of the volcano.
All right. Yeah, let's do one more and then call it good for this section. It's a little bit on both volcanoes, but Lori May asks, is USGS specifically focusing on the deep plumbing network and the channels as it feeds the volcanoes, or more specifically working towards identifying Ys and shunts or anything like that you've heard of?
I think they're trying to do everything they can. Yeah, I think we have heard them describe in past volcano watches this deploying ambient seismograph seismometers, so they can actually have some more information about the resonance of those pathways and the location of those pathways, and maybe from there you can get some constraint on movement, ideally, right? One of our golden piece of information is always that eruption rate and that supply rate, right? That's something we always want to know all the time for every eruption ever, continuously, and how it's changing all the time. So anything you can do to get towards that, then that's what they're doing, right? So it does include all the surface observations that are easy visual things, put up a camera and leave it, but it also involves a lot of modeling and a lot of inversions of the tilt and GPS and the INSAR signals, all as a coherent data package as well.
All right. Well, that does it for this line of questions. We will be doing one more after Phil goes through his special little presentation that he's prepared for you guys today.
Yeah, and this is all prompted by the USGS's Volcano Watch this week, right? Volcano Watch this week is the lava lakes of Kilauea then and now. And we actually teased this a little bit without knowing it in our last update. We discussed this exact pattern here of lava rising up around the edges of the crater here. And this is the original photograph from December 11th, 1919, put in by the USGS. I'll just describe what you see here first. This is hard to make out. This really dark stuff is solid rock that's rising through the lava lake. Right, there's a bit here, and it goes around in an arc back over here as well. It's like a horseshoe-shaped island because there's lava on the outside and there's lava on the inside. Right, and it's kind of forming a ring. And all this solid rock is actually that epimagma that covered in rubble, the actual semi-solid plug that was within a threaded volcano that got pushed up and is being pushed through, and lava's kind of puddling around it on top and squeezing it outside of the edges of it. And that's what we'll show you guys in a little more detail without having to just do this with my hands continually. Try to give you guys some more visual views here. But the whole point of this Volcano Watch article is actually to put forth two different situations of lava along the edges of craters in lava lakes. So you have this situation here of coming up around the plug from 1919, and this does connect to what we presented in 1921 with the overflows 100 years ago in March 1921. So we'll talk about that whole sequence from 1919 to 1921. But they also bring up in here, well, they also bring up Kīlaueaiki, and let me find it here. Here's a paragraph right here. The eruption of Kīlaueaiki in 1959 provided another opportunity to document lava lake behaviors. And actually, it's this one right here. During the 8th episode, scientists on the east edge of the lake noticed that the lake crust was slightly higher in the middle, and it primarily foundered around the lower edges as overall lava level rose. So in Kīlaueaiki, which is a closed-off crater as well, lava was erupting from the side, originally above, but then it filled in to where it's kind of from the side. Not that unlike what we have going on now here at Halemaʻumaʻu. And so they were noticing that on a far, far edge of the crust, as where they were seeing the lava level tried to meet. So they're describing what we're actually witnessing on Halemaʻumaʻu today, right? And here's the thermal image of Halemaʻumaʻu, and it's showing this yellowish stuff on the outside. That's the hotter lava coming up in this ring, oozing up in this ring on the margins of this crater right in there, right? And what was happening then is, similar to this, you had lava coming in one side of the crater, and that it was going under the crust, and the crust was having to rise, and it was pulling away from the crater wall, as it sounds like what was happening there as well. Because it's hard to just talk about, I'm going to show you guys some of these. Another colorized image by Dane here is taken during that 8th episode of Kīlaueaiki fountaining, right? So we're looking from the edge of the lava lake on the floor of Kīlaueaiki. So if you ever hike Kīlaueaiki and you come out of the forest, this is more or less a similar view. Looking towards the west, you see the cinder cone of Pu'upua'i, the vents right in here with all this gas coming out, and this is the actual active lava lake right in here. You can see there's some craggy stuff on the edge over here. Right, so this is showing you guys a distance between a vent and the location of this foundering on the side. And if you're curious, the original looks like this. That's the original and colorized. Improvement there, mahalo Dane. And this one didn't turn out as well, but we do see on the east side of the lava lake here. Right, here's the geologist walking on an earlier lava overflow, and they're showing that right in here, this zone right in here is where they're having the foundering occurring. There's a big slab getting bowled over right in there. Right, so I can come down and read the caption here. And it does say, structure in a lava lake at the east end of the crater. Small pahoehoe flows and the bulbous oozes of the 8th phase lavas overtop the 6th phase lavas on which the man is standing. And so this is the 8th phase right in here. And this is the 6th phase right in here, episode 6 and episode 8 of the fountains of Kīlaueaiki. Right, so pretty far away, you are having lava squeeze up along the edge, and not Iceland, but Hawaii, and 60 years ago, and you could walk down into the pit also and go up to the edge just like that. Right? So that's the one comparison. So certainly a good point, right? Here is the USGS image we just showed you guys, and colorized by Dan at the top. It is a good point that lava coming in from below into the lava lake from below has a different dynamic than lava pouring in from, let's say, far away across the crater on the other side of the crater. The big difference being that you can't quite tell as easily, but these rocks right in here are actually bowled upwards, right? They're tilted upwards on the edge and sagged in the middle. They have that kind of structure and cross-section. I'll show you guys Jagger's drawing shortly. But that's thought to be because the lava pushed up the edges and was able to deform the semi-solid crust to the point where it actually deformed it and made that bowl like that, right? So one thing that the USGS is pointing out in the Volcano Watch article is we don't see any kind of bowing of any of the crust edge. We don't see this effect at all today. And good point, and that's because the lava isn't coming in from below, you'd imagine, right? And maybe if that changes someday, we might see some different effects, and you would need to develop some semi-solid magma plug like this material, which maybe is what's going on under the crust now. We can't tell yet because it's too soon. Okay, so this is a view on December 11th, 1919. And actually what's happening is the whole thing is rising. This whole piston is rising. It looks like the lava is at a higher point right in here, right? But it's kind of just, remember, puddling into the low spots. So if we advance one frame to 5 days later on the 16th, colorized on top, original on the bottom, you guys can see here, it looks like we see a shelf emerging. Right? The edges of this semi-solid plug are rising out of the lava lake now, and the lava is puddling at a lower level down here in the edges below. A couple views from 1919 there. And to show you guys what this looks like, in cross-section here, this is a view in July 10th, 1919, before. Right? So this is kind of before all this activity, just showing you guys there had been a few lava lakes, a north lake, a southwest lake, a main lake, and there were channels connecting them that were crusted over, and he had smaller little glowing pits in them. Right? That was typical of much of the beginning of 1919. But in November, here's November 28th, there was a massive draining. Lava drained out 180 meters. That is 591 feet. And you only had a little triangular lava lake at the bottom. This is described by the USGS in their article here. And there it is. There it is in map form drawn by Jagger. You see all kinds of little flows, little ooze out flows, and collapse fans coming down into that pit, right? Drained away pretty fast, and it didn't stay down very long. It came back up pretty fast as well, too. So just to show you guys the cross sections here at the bottom, we'll come back to these. And imagine you have lava coming in at the edges, because there is activity at the edges here as well, but also through the middle of that plug here in 1919. And then when everything drains away, you still have some remnant pathways, some lubrication was described, right? Jagger describes how the surface of the pit around the lava lake, you could see a lot of these former benches were similar to what you could see them up higher up before the whole collapse happened. So this really showed him that this central part was semi-solid and it was rising and falling like a piston, right? And so he actually said that the lava on the outer edges must be lubricating it in a way, because there was no massive explosions or cracking. It just slid back down. And that's something I believe is in the Volcano Watch text. If you guys go and read it, this does talk about that in there, right? So this is kind of just a little companion piece to take it further from what they said there, right? So that is 1919, and here is a pit in 1919 of what that draining looked like. So they talked about how the previous evening the lava level had been up to the level of the rim shown here, so that one could walk out onto the inner floor. And the next day there's a 600-foot drop to the lava surface down there. So I'm gonna lean a little bit now on, there's a talk by Scott Rowland from Manoa about the 1919 Mauna eruption that you guys can find. I believe we put it out December 20th of 2019 on a 100-year anniversary of Mauna. And so he shows the same kind of map and does borrow a 1921 collapse image as a stand-in, because it was noteworthy that when lava drained away, they could actually see these big tunnels, right? A lot of magma pathways out into the southwest rift zone and into the northeast caldera. And so it's interesting to point that out there. And so that draining was part of the Mauna sequence. And what happened afterwards is that lava came back in, and it came back in along this edge first, right? So this image now, let me give you guys a date, December 9th, 1919. Right? So just before that image was taken, we don't have that central lake quite yet. There is a fountain right in here coming up through the middle, but mostly the lava is coming up along the edges, along this northeast edge, right? And circulating. And you see the arrows for the direction of movement of the lava surface in that ring, right? And there it is, kind of in cross section as the whole plug comes upwards. Lava, the lubrication along the edges is still there, but it is coming up through the middle as well. And at its peak here, December 15th, 1919, there is the map. There is our horseshoe-shaped island we saw the image of in the USGS photograph. Right there it is in map form. And you can see that what they're describing here was fountaining and upwelling along everywhere on the outside, and the middle of the lake being very calm, very calm. Maybe a little bit of localized action, but for the most part, a lot of not just quiet, right? Something that Jagger described, was another observation that helped him form his views on epimagma and perimagma. And look at the cross section here; you can really see big pathways on the edges and smaller pathways in the middle. And here is that bowl that's tipped upwards right in here, right? Tipped up on the edges. And this is what USGS is talking about and trying to describe in their article. Right? So if I can put all the cross sections in sequence here, at the top to bottom, July at the top, and then collapsing down, and then refilling in December, and lifting up, flooding all around that plug, which is what you see right in here, which is getting deformed. And that's the 1919 sequence. And here is a view. I'll show you guys the original, November 30th. So you can see lava rising back in, and a little bit of that island starting to form here in the early days. And that all is part of the sequence of the Mauna eruption, which Jagger's photograph here is in a southwest caldera. I won't spend too much time on this, but there is that whole part of that where that story fits into this. So check out that 1919 talk if you're interested in more about that. Here's another slide from that presentation showing the configuration of the deep magma chamber, shallow chamber, and eruption site at Mauna off to the side over here. Right. Mauna over here, shallow storage, deep storage right in there. And the reason that's important is they were actually using the lava lake and the eruption site and measuring volumes, calculating volumes to then try to get some idea of the connection, right? So when we saw the lava drain out of Halemaʻumaʻu early on the 28th of November, it was leaving shallow storage going towards the future eruption site of Mauna on the side. Still not connected to deep storage, and there was not a whole lot of movement through there, which is why everything just dropped back down. And that's the 28th. Then the next day, the deep storage kicks in, comes and replenishes it, pushes the piston back up and floods it all around. That's what's going on there. But what continues happening is the extra pressure of the full lava lake and the added pressure from deep storage now allows this blade of Mauna to open further. So it's going to go on to erupt, and the lava lake is going to drop again. Right? So I won't go through all of Mauna eruption here, but you kind of see that there's all kinds of interaction. All kinds of interaction between this deep storage and a shallow storage and eruption site here with various stages of the eruption here, right? And that's how they've divided the stages, is based on a movement of magma, and that's where all the details of that presentation by Dr. Rowland are detailed there. Another slide from that presentation here, and just to show you guys the dots here, these are the lava level. So lava level was up here, overflowing, dropped back all the way down, came up, and then all this plot is, so it goes down, comes up, down, comes up, goes down, comes up, goes down. So that all during Maunaiki's eruption. This is all that long-lived, I believe it was 8 or 9 months, 9-month eruption of Maunaiiki. December to August. Yeah. And a tilt, there's a tilt signal, north-south tilt and east-west tilt up here. And that's part of what was used to untangle the volumes here, right? But what I was just trying to show you guys is how much the lava lake level varied. You can see through here, right? And that was a key indicator of the pressure and the volumes coming into the volcano, and where were they coming from and where were they going to. Okay, so we're almost done here. So that's what leads us to the refilling of the lava lake post Maunaiiki eruption, and this is kind of where it began our 2021 presentation. Right, lava coming back into the crater, having multiple ponds there and there, all within this inner pit, and you see these crags are pieces of that semi-solid plug that's making up that circle island that at this point is more exposed as a whole plug rather than being drowned by all the lava. So it's from here that we return to having this configuration of lava lake. We now have lava lake ponds in the west, and the east, and the southeast, and the southwest, right, where we have still feeders from the edges, and we have almost like lava tubes that flow along those channel edges where they connect the pools together, depending where your cross section actually cuts through. And this is where we kind of teased it in our last update here. Was this possibility of lava coming up along the edges from below at some point in the future as the lava lake rises, and maybe drowns that vent, and maybe that semi-solid lava hardens a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more to start deforming in the manner we saw it happen 100 years ago, as described by Jagger here. So that's sort of 1921 eruption. And similar to that view I showed you guys of that pit that was all the way collapsed. The person was standing right here looking in. The lava's all the way back up to the top and overflowing a couple years later. And so that is it. If I can find one more photograph, I will throw it in there. But that is the focus that we have here on lava rising up along the edges of the crater, and what we might have here. Here's the last picture that I'm throwing here. Nighttime image, not quite as good. You can see this glow at night of that ring of lava around the outside, right? And you see there's lava crusted on the inside as well, but not nearly as bright. It's not overturning as much. It's barely moving. It's basically flooding in there from that small pit in the middle, and possibly from some of the low spots on the edges. Although you really see it's built a barrier around itself there, right? Jagger actually describes this island as a lily-shaped island, right? Like a lily pad, like upturned on the edges there. So fascinating stuff there, and mahalo to the USGS for bringing up that topic once again. It's interesting to think about that, and yeah, and conclude to agree that we are coming in from the side more like Kīlaueaiki, but we're somewhere in the middle, because we are possibly building some semi-solid stuff in there, and it's Kīlaueaiki, the whole, was a much shorter eruption than the one we have now, right? And it was a smaller area as well, so you could have more. You could have more balance more quickly in that shorter distance, right? Rather than having to spread across the whole large caldera we have now at Halemaʻumaʻu.
Right. It's interesting to me. Last week we did the 1921 eruption. This week going back a little 1919, kind of filling in the gap. And the thing that's interesting in the context is you go from, what we're talking about now to 3 years later, the 1924 explosions and collapse, which is just interesting in and of itself that it changes so fast up there. Just a couple years means a whole lot.
Yeah, there are certain times like that era 100 years ago and like this era now where things are changing fast. Yeah,
Right.
you know, same thing. Go from 2018 to 2020, it's not that big a gap really. And into 2008, yeah, we had lava lake up, all the way down, all the way back up again. Not all the way, coming up again, partway.
But the funny part is you could sit there and like show the 2018 collapse, image from that, and then an image from right now to somebody like Don, there's a volcanologist, and they'd be like, oh yeah, that's normal. And then you just dropped it on. Oh yeah, by the way, there was a water lake that formed in between these.
Right.
It only was 2 years in time, but there was a full water lake that got deep and then it disappeared. So like you could miss that entirely.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about this 21st century technology, right? It's different than Jagger. We're trying to follow the tradition of Jagger and know every little observation of the changing things day to day, and not just generalize it too much. But certainly there was a lot that was missed because you had to walk out there, and if you weren't there, it got missed, right? And that was one of the big reasons that Jagger had for establishing permanent observatories on volcanoes rather than just going once in a while and you missed it, and it's erupting, but I got to leave, and he just really hated that.
Right. And all the seismographs really improved over time. They had them back in his day, but they were pretty rough. Like you'd see the big things, but that's about it, especially from afar. But yeah, really interesting stuff. We do have a few questions here, some good ones that I do want to go through. More abstract than what we've been the previous ones, but Michael T asks about the different colorations in the lava flows, right? So when we look at it, sometimes it'll be the glow coming from the lava will be either dark red, which some people are used to, and going down to everything from yellow to orange, or to orange to yellow, and to even hot white. So can you explain a little bit of the colorations?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. It's not my expertise, but it does involve. You do have, let's say, within just Kilauea with one kind of lava, then you do have a range of temperature or of colors based on temperature. So in the past, they actually used to measure temperature as an indication, or measure color as an indication of temperature, right? So the more white hot it is, the hotter it is, right? And the redder goes down an orange to a red, and eventually to a black would be, right? There used to be a big picture of a lava fountain in the Jagger Museum that described just that with the instrument, right? That's how it was done in the early days. Now we have temperature guns and other means as well, right? So
right.
But that's one. There is color variation there. You also have color variation between different chemistries of lava. So you can have lavas that are more carbon rich, for example, right? That might be more of a yellowish or a whitish, but actually have a lower temperature, and so that kind of really can throw a gear in it. So it really depends what you're talking about, but in the same volcano or across different volcanoes. Yeah.
All right. So Jonathan from YouTube is asking about Haleakala and Maui, and why is it still active if it's so far away from where the dominant hotspot is thought to be?
Yeah, that's an unknown as well. I mean, there's a lot of ideas, right? There's a whole part of the plume. So as a plume comes up and it's interacting with the bottom of the plate, there's one half of the plume that's on the top that can interact with the plate sooner. There's also bottom of the plume, as a plume gets bent over, that goes farther away from that focus. And it's often thought, it's been proposed at least, that the rejuvenation stage of Hawaiian volcanoes comes from that kind of effect, where you do have a part of the plume, the lower part of the plume, that's in train and is able to finally come up beyond the hotspot. And that's why you do see rejuvenant volcanoes, not just on Maui, but on Oahu and other places as well. So that's one idea. There is, of course, the idea of the thinning of the lithosphere, right? The actual solid material can be a little bit thinner after being worn away by the hotspot as well. So that's an idea that's been floated as well. But that's basically it.
Right.
We don't exactly know.
All right, let's bring it back. Those are some two hard questions. They were good questions.
Yeah.
And
I mean, the guys at UH Manoa are way better people. Now, if you live on Oahu, that's the main thing you worry about is rejuvenative volcanism, right? And if we live on a big island, the most thing you worry about is active volcanism. So
they study it more.
Look for them for expertise.
Right. Ask you a little bit easier question for you. Take a cruise on this one. Bill from YouTube asks about as the level of the lava lake rises above the vent, will fluid pressure cause the flow rate to decrease?
It seems like it would. Yeah. I have talked about the north vent getting dry in the past. I'm not fully convinced that that was all there was going on with that north vent was the lava drain back action. There might have been something else happening as well. Wait and see more signals about that. So there might have been some level of coincidence there. I'm not sure exactly, right? But in general, you'd imagine that if you have a low enough pressure, then drowning the vent could actually stop the flow out of that vent, right?
Right.
If you have high enough pressure, you can have fountains jet up through a lava lake just as easily as was the case in Kīlaueaiki. Right. So it's all about the base pressure more, and yeah, you certainly could have some variations, but the base pressure is more important.
Right, and that's one of the things, like, just when I'm thinking about 2018 and Fissure 8 when it came up that first time, and when you see it in person, right, when you're there in person looking at it, you're like, I don't care how much magma you put on top of this thing, it's still going to come up through it. There was such pressure there, it was just mind-boggling when it was, in the heat of that eruption. So yeah, completely agree there.
Yeah, Kīlaueaiki had waves, right? There are actually waves moving across the lava surface.
Right. Michael T asked a question that is relevant for us in the Lower East Rift Zone, especially in Leilani, where we have a few of them around. How can volcanic eruptions cause sinkholes or pit craters in the years following?
Well, so it's kind of a trick question, I think, a little bit, because an eruption itself can cause a sinkhole if the magma moves out somewhere else in the area where it was. You can have a collapse pit occur there, right? I'd call it a collapse pit rather than a sinkhole right there. That's the simplest, most straightforward way that it happens. So where the magma was before, if it leaves that area and goes somewhere else, you can have a pit form there. But craters don't only form like that. There could be interaction with water, and you could have steam blasts, right? So in Leilani, a lot of those big craters are from big steam blasts, in fact. That can be, a way you can have a hole form after the fact in a volcanic area, right? And maybe an eruption could come into an area that's wet and cause explosions like that as well, and maybe that's part of that answer too. But you could also just have the ground settling and moving, or the faults moving can cause sinkholes as well, right? If it's just the south flank moves and there's no volcanic eruption, you could still have widening of the area that's already cracked, and you could have pits and collapses form there in between eruptions. And maybe that's where you're going with this. That when I think of a sinkhole, I think something more along those lines. It's collapsing because of some other ground movement apart from the volcanic eruption itself, and that's why I started off saying I thought it was a little bit tricky in that way.
Right.
Maybe that gives you some ideas, and hopefully that answered the question, Michael. That's more how we think of it, right? Whereas I think of a sinkhole more traditionally as something in limestone, where the limestone's dissolved by water and then it takes away support and then it collapses, or whether you have like underground water flow moving out some sediment, and then suddenly you have a collapse, right? Like a burst water pipe washing out a bunch of sand or something, and then suddenly, right? That's kind of, I think of a sinkhole more like that.
Yeah. All right. Nicholas on YouTube asks, aren't pyroclastic flows simply volcanic mass wasting events similar to a landslide, or is simply an eruption column collapsing? I'm
not an expert in pyroclastic flows, but going back to my my early education, there's actually a combination. It's some combination of those things and something else, right? So I showed you guys the video of Mount St. Helens lava dome growing. At some point, those things get to be too big, and then they collapse on themselves. So you do get a collapse of that, and a lot of times you do have pyroclastic flows generated from collapses of lava domes. You have enough of a collapse, you actually could have more of the fresh stuff come out and get entrained as well, right? So if you do have enough of a collapse to like essentially decap it and induce an eruption column, then you do get the pyroclastic flow of the collapse of the lava dome and the column both together moving as well, and you also get the fresh material all through there. And a big important part of the pyroclastic flow is having that superheated gas in there too. Right? That's that allows all the different particles to not fuse together, but actually bounce off each other and flow like a dust cloud, rather than a really hot burning dust cloud, right? Rather than just goop together and stick to the ground, right? So that's as far as I can take it.
Well, appreciate it. Appreciate everybody that showed up and asked their question. If your question did not get answers, we apologize, but we try to get through them in the chat or in asking Phil directly. So that does it for this round of questions. Appreciate everybody. Until next time, we are brought to you by Hawaii Tracker. Come check us out on hawaiitracker.com.
Yeah, mahalo everybody. Mahalo everyone, all of our donors, our supporters, everyone who's liking and sharing our content. We really appreciate it. Yeah, we'll be back to you guys on Tuesday and bring you guys some more information here on Kilauea, and we'll leave Mauna Loa till Friday unless she starts stirring again a little bit more. Then we can hop in again and do Mauna Loa each time as well. But otherwise, we'll stick to Mauna Loas on Fridays for the most part, unless there's something else going on in a shorter term. So give you guys some background of what that might constitute, right? If we go into fourth gear, then we'll add it on. But if it's still more of the same, like we've had the last since mid-January, then we'll keep it to Friday. So mahalo, guys. Thank you guys for Hawaii Tracker, for Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong. Aloha.